what we can really say is that, beginning in the late 19th century, Spain had already shed most of its empire and was continuing to shed its empire. It was essentially a decrepit nation at home in many ways, because a lot of the benefit of the empire flowed to other parts of the world and other parts of Europe, and not necessarily Spain or the people of Spain. The trends that were taking place in Europe, let's say, 48 was a huge pivot point in terms of shifting the mood on the liberal side, because before that, the liberals were very, French oriented, the French Republic kind of oriented mentality versus traditionalism in Spain versus kind of a intermediate, conservative, what we would consider conservative, like let's keep it running, but let's slowly liberalize mentality. The Carlist wars were going on, where the hardcore conservatives, or certain types of hardcore conservatives, were struggling, not just for ideological control, but more like having their people in charge of the government to slow down liberalization. And then you get, as time goes on in the rest of Europe, you have 1871, 70, 71, late 60s, etc. You have these numerous kind of liberalizing and socialist movements that are spreading around Europe. Finelli, the anarchist, and a number of other people race to Spain as Spain opens up to the to kind of liberal concepts and ideologies, because of the changes that are taking place, the liberalizing tendencies within the central government there. And it kind of becomes a race to see who can spread their ideology, and who's gonna find something that really works for them. Some of that was focused externally. So you have this desire to bring these very mature, and radical Spanish movements to the First International, conference structure in Europe in the 1860s and 70s, wherein they find that Spain is you're either like a mainstream centralist liberal, which is pretty socialist and pretty anti-clerical and anti-Christian, and pretty radical, just kind of in a controlled way. And then you have these anarchists. So there were very few like Marxist Spanish in this period. There were some, but their numbers were teensy compared to the more radical working class and kind of lower middle educated ideological classes. So there's a split that took place there, a schism essentially, in about 1872. And these groups had time to mature. So by the time you get to World War I, which Spain stayed out of, Spain's economy was doing okay, but people, like, just culturally had become much more radical than it would look like on paper. You have these very well-paid miners in Asturias, for example. They're among the most well-paid working class people in all of Europe. They're just anarchists. That's become their culture. They're anti-religious, anti-church and anti-state, anti-bourgeois, in this very radical tendency. And you'll also recall that during World War I, the communists international, because at this point the Socialist International, or all the international working men's associations, etc., these had fractured and factionalized to where there was a very large communist international that became like the thing after the Soviet Union was established, like 1917, 1918, 1919, to where there's a huge amount of resources available through this communist international in the rest of Europe. They're fomenting revolution all over the place. The war is still pretty hot in a lot of places in Central and Eastern Europe in 1918, 1919, and moving into the 1920s with all these Bolshevik struggles that are taking place. And at this time, Spain is still a constitutional monarchy with a Cortes, so like a parliament that is much more radical than it looks like on paper. And there's just constant street fighting at this point between the more radical factions. The traditionalists, like the Carlists, they're still around. They have political parties. Eventually, they'll have a single political party that unites all of them around the country, but they're very factionalized in this parliamentary system. And you have like these youth radicals left and right. You have labor unions left and right that are kind of the political flow through which people are plugging in. And it's a very political society, which is usually not a good sign. Our society's become very political. That's not a good sign in terms of considering the stability of the nation. So it gets so bad in terms of street violence, and the Cortes is so just frankly useless in terms of like dealing with real problems, that in 1923 there is one of the many coups in Spain takes place, and it is a right-wing coup wherein General Primo de Rivera is made dictator. And again, this is with the approval of the king. So the balance that's taking place at this point is that they're just tamping down on all radicalism. Politics kind of gets suspended, on paper, and parliamentary politics is just put on hold and crushed by the government. A lot of like leftist radicals go overseas at this point. You even have Spanish kind of what you would think of as kind of closer to like central liberal socialists drifting a little left, moving towards the Soviet sphere just because they have power. And they also don't like the anarchists at this point. The anarchists are severed from the rest of the left. And so you have these people going to the Soviet Union just to check it out for the time being. There's a relaxation and then an end to the dictatorship in 1930. And in 1931, still under the king, there are elections that are held that the press declares to be a kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down on whether we're happy with a monarchy or we want a republic, like a formal republic with no king, rather than this kind of divided system. And there's a lot of real support for the left, but there's also, kind of shenanigans in certain areas that are really controlled by the political left, not in other areas. But overall, the left does so well. The pro-republic forces do so well. And again, in the original kind of map of this, like a pro-republican mentality can cover a pretty wide swath of left and right and center. So the king basically says, I'm treating this as like a threat to my life and, you know, the legitimacy of my rule. I'm out of here. He leaves the country. A lot of you know, traditionalist right-wing high profile people leave, and the Second Spanish Republic is proclaimed. Now, immediately, the far left use this as a way to get more and more power outside of the government and inside the government. So there become really radical left-wing elements within the authority of the republic, like the in the civil guard, the assault guards are established as a modern new republic loyal strike force, kind of like it's essentially a super light infantry operation, kind of like if you think FBI hostage rescue team, but with like more light machine guns and stuff like that. That's kind of what they are. And what they do is they go after these political quote unquote extremists on the left and the right, leaning a little more towards the right, to keep the stability and control of the republic. And so at this point, everyone's still using electoral politics in the vote, but they're radicalizing